Bonus!
Crew, what the hell is going on? Oh, look out! Piper, now!
Here are these words. Here are the rhyme.
Crew, Piper, Page, look!
Hear now the words of the witches.
Keep it going, Phoebe.
Hear now the words of the witches.
The words of the witches. The words of the witches.
Crew, Piper, Page, keep chanting.
Hear now the words of the
Keep
witches.
it going, Phoebe. Keep it going.
Hear now the words of the
Keep chanting.
Words of the witches.
Hear now the words.
The words of the witches. The story.
Crew, Piper, Page, look! Keep chanting.
Hear now the words of the witches.
Keep chanting.
What ass backward spell did you guys cast?
This is Kevin, and welcome to Words of the Witches.
Hear now the words of the witches.
Piper, Page, look!
The words of the witches. The words of the witches. The words of the witches. Hear now the words of the witches.
Keep chanting.
Hear now the words of the witches.
All right, we are back at Words of the Witches. This is part 2 of the 3-part bonus series of the Moral Alignment in Charmed. And today we're talking about Good, part 2. Ethan is back with me, again, continuing the journey.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello, I'm so excited. I feel like this one's a little more ambiguous, so I want to
Yes, evil was
this one's gonna
pretty
be a bit
much...
of figuring it out.
Yeah, evil was easy to figure out because it's just they're a constant in the show. And while this good and neutral to come are throughout the show, it's we don't think about them as much. So
Yeah, it's almost like the premise of the show is confronting evil and discovering like the evil threats. Like the focus is so much on evil, whereas like kind of along the way you kind of encounter other forces of good, like by circumstance. So I'm like, I feel like it's just not as direct. So I feel like this will be interesting.
Yeah. So let's give a little introduction about what good is. So the forces of good are led by the Council of Elders, and they consist of good witches, whitelighters, angels, benevolent supernatural beings such as leprechauns and nymphs. The whole magical community is in there. And good beings provide healing, foster positive emotions, and attempt to protect innocence and vanquish evil, or vanquish evil, we say in my podcast sometimes. So what are your general feelings about good? I mean, I guess they're nice.
Yeah. I feel like the thing is that I feel like with good, it's a sense of like, I feel like pretty easily in the show, like they define like if harm none, do what you will. Like magic is, you're not supposed to use it for personal gain. So there's an element of right. So I feel like that's kind of a basis of what defines good when you do things to protect innocence selflessly, stuff like that,
Yeah. I have to think about it though, because we talked about how in evil we still believe that they might have the possibility to feel emotion and do good things, but they repress that a lot of the time. Do you think the same could be true for good?
Yeah, I feel like if one is one, I feel like it has to work both ways.
Sure.
Sure. Like, and I feel like I said last episode, like Phoebe, I think is a perfect example of the possibility that every person inside of them has to go down that path. It's kind of this choice, in some ways.
Right. And you can become evil to good or good to evil. We've seen that happen where people shift just by, little things. Either they choose to, most of the time or even like spells put on them. There's that option too. So,
well, kind of like when the Book of Shadows turned evil and then they became evil, it's kind of like
gloom, yeah.
Right. So there's times when magic can turn you into evil, or there's times when bad choices and like the thing is that what it reminds me of is kind of like Sam almost. But that's a part that I kind of think about is like Paige's dad was a whitelighter. He wasn't making necessarily good choices, but he just kind of fell into like that lost category.
Yeah.
He was just a lost person. So I feel like the question is whether like, because like we've established that the show had this kind of breeding element to it where like you're either born good or you're born evil in certain ways. And then there was other times where it was you could make choices and go down one or the other. So I feel like it's a little bit of
It gets
inconsistent.
muddy. It gets muddy for sure, because
Yeah.
they say that your place in life, either good or evil, will dictate your behavior, whereas a lot of times your behavior kind of puts you where you end up. So it's very muddy trickiness. It's hard
Well, it's
to
like
pinpoint.
also I think it goes back to the nature versus nurture thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the question of, is it your experiences that affect your mind, that affect your choices, or is it your your breeding and your psychological like genealogy that makes you make certain choices? Like I feel like it's kind of the question of, in certain situations it could be either.
Sure. And it should be noted that a good being can I can't talk. A good being can commit an act of great evil without being turned to the side of evil.
Okay.
So think about like when I think of like the finale of season 6, for instance. You know, Gideon's like to Leo's like, "What are you doing? A great evil," and the whole like and he kills him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like when Chris, I mean, this is in season 6 when they didn't know what to do with his character, but he's killing Valkyries, like, ooh,
Yeah.
questionable. Very shady
Yes.
stuff.
So there
And
is
so,
that, like, that's the gray area where you see
yeah,
people kind of they dip their toe a little bit into the questionable, like they start acting with evil intent, like they're really essentially making those types of choices. So
right. And I guess we should think about like, there's no real reason why they don't turn evil because of this, or they don't go down the road of evil. And I guess the argument can be made is that it's because they felt guilt for their actions, and so
mhm.
maybe they believe that their actions serve the greater good, whatever that means. Everyone goes on about the
Yes.
greater good.
Well, I think the two examples you use are perfect examples of that. Like with Leo, he was trying to, it was almost like he was protecting his children
Mm-hmm.
from this force that, like from Gideon, which he didn't know was Gideon, and then he killed like, so that was in the pursuit of protecting his children, which was in a greater good. And then Chris was trying to save the future, so he did some questionable things in the pursuit of a greater good.
Right.
So I think that's where I feel like that's where the gray area is. It's like, maybe the question is, what is your ultimate goal? Like, what are you going after in the pursuit of these things? Maybe.
Yeah. How reasonable, how you know sympathetic are your reasons? So,
Well, also, even like a good example is like, there are times when even like the elders, which are like the poster child for good,
oh my
they do some
gosh.
stuff where you're like, that's kind of really crappy. Or they did, like, whenever in the end of season 7, when they kind of just shut themselves off from the Charmers because they think they're gonna die, so they're kind of like, we're gonna wash our hands of you, and you can, like, that was a little bit of betrayal, and it wasn't necessary, it was just self-preservation, and that seems a little bit in God's
we,
spirit.
we will get to that. For me, I believe the elders are the greatest evil in the entire series.
Yes, yeah, I
I
think,
hate them so much.
yes, I totally subscribe to that. I believe that too.
So when we start our hierarchy, let's talk about the elders a bit.
Yeah, we'll get
Because
to it.
but Gideon was an elder who again thought he was doing the greater good. He's like, I'm
Hmm.
gonna stop Wyatt from turning evil and shifting the balance in the grand design. Everyone goes on about the grand design a lot, which will come up more in the neutral. But
Yeah. So I was saying, so one of the points that I think, like, I like to think is I feel like the writers used the elders as a, because I know especially when they started the show, there was a lot of concern over the reception of the Wiccan aspect and how it was going to be like Satanist, and they were concerned that people would reject the show because of that. And I think that, part of the the triquetra is also like a Christian symbol of the Holy Trinity, and like there's some kind of
and they were afraid of using the pentagram and pentacle because of that
yes,
reason too.
yes.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
is this kind of almost association with Christianity and more kind of, I guess, American accepted ways of religion and stuff. So I think the elders, I think a lot of times played that like high council, like the church, and there were times when they were very morally kind of they kind of had their noses up at everybody and felt like they were higher than thou, and this sort of attitude. And I feel like Gideon is an example of someone who, in the name of what they believe is good, does great evil because they get too carried away with this myopic view of what the church believes, or like whatever this thing believes and what we stand for, and fighting for that. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's where a lot of that narrative was based, that made them kind of evil in a way.
And I think there has to be some kind of ego and selfishness attached to that too. Like you say, you're doing it for the church or the greater good, but really it's to make it sure that you look good in the eyes of your superior or the people who look over
it's
you.
this very like performative kind of like, we need,
I want to heaven,
yeah, it's like, well, we have a standard, we have a way of doing things, and that kind of intolerance around alternative routes to getting to the same end. It's like, you have to do it our way, you have to be like us. So, and I think that's the other thing I wanted to mention was, I feel like the greatest good in the hierarchy, which when we start to stack, I'm sure we can get to that. But
Yeah.
I feel like the charmed ones are that center of the universe, because they are like, they have a humanity about them that lets them see they're not the extremes, and they're that middle ground that I think allows them to have like, they have bits of maybe evil tendencies when the situation provokes. They have bits of everything, which makes them, I think, moderate and full, like whole. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah.
No, humanity is nuanced and layered and messy, and that's what's beautiful about it.
Yeah.
And that's what gives you the freedom to see things differently or explore areas that those extremes can't see.
Right.
So I get it totally.
Yeah. So do we want to? What do we want to do? Do we want to start with the hierarchy?
Sure.
I'm excited.
Okay. So I have the elders right at the top, and that does not to say that they are the most powerful thing in the universe, because we do know there are beings that exist above them.
Right. But for the hierarchy of good.
For the hierarchy of good. So I believe they're the top tier of the good category.
Yeah, they're the elites of the good sector.
Yes. They always try to micromanage everybody. They have their little white-lighter minions. They want to have an eye on the witches that,
they're
very
the
good
big
witches.
brother, just constantly looking and watching everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do what I say. And it's so crazy to me whenever the show talks about how the powers come from the elders, or the elders have the ability to suppress like when they take Phoebe's powers away, and your premonitions come when I tell you get a premonition.
Yeah.
I hate that so much, because that does not make sense.
Yeah,
to me.
yeah.
That does not
well,
feel...
I think it's almost like, it was like, that was when it was like they were like, this was a government. They had this like similar to like a government, because they are, I guess, governors of good in some way. And they like passed a sentence down to Phoebe, and I felt like that was a weird thing to do. And then they revoked her powers, which I'm like, I totally agree. I'm like, that makes no sense to give them the ability to govern in that way. Like, that's not.
No.
That's a precedent for them to do all sorts of other crazy stuff that, like, I don't think they should be able to do.
Right, because for me, like, the powers and everything should be just a part of them that exists, and it's it's like their responsibility to deal with it in their own way.
Yes.
And
it's like fiber of their being. It's part of who they are. It's not something you can extract. Like if you were to equate magical powers to like an artist and their artistic skill, like my creativity or whatever, you can't like go, oh, well, you used your creativity poorly, so we're going to extract that from you. It's like, that doesn't make, you can't punish someone in that way. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and say they go against like the innate rule about personal gain, which they do a lot, and if that's going to be reason to take away the powers or have repercussions for it, that should be the universe itself or the grand design or the people above them that would have that kind of power, not the
Well,
elders.
also I think that for
So-
anything like that's innately wrong, there's a natural consequence that comes of it. That's why it's wrong.
Mhm.
So if you do something,
the
yeah,
universe.
like when Phoebe in like I forget which episode it was when she became like the hotel psychic in the early season 1, and
Yeah, Dead Man Dating.
yes, you're so good with the recall. And she got the lottery ticket, and I think that was the same episode.
Well, that one's I've got you under my skin.
Oh, okay. And and so it's like that was the first example of personal gain. It's just not going to work. Like it'll just erase itself, and you can't use your powers in that way. Like that's the consequence. It's not like, well, but you chose to do that, so we're going to punish you and take your power. Like it's just, I totally agree. That was some random other writer that came into the group and decided to do that. I feel like.
Yeah, they're mixing it up. So in my way, no matter how many times they might say the elders have something to do with it, I don't agree. I beseech that. I reject.
Yeah,
that
and
theory.
one last thing, like one thing I always thought was really weird about the elders was that they did have such a hold on like they were constantly able to peek in on
They had their
you.
hand in everything.
Yeah, they were so controlling and involved, and I'm like, any institution or thing that feels like it needs to be that micromanaging and involved and aware of every little thing that's going on is exercising a level of desire to control in a way that I don't think that's nefarious to have that level of insecurity that we need to watch you. We need to control you.
Mhm.
Like that's also a little iffy to me.
It's very culty.
Very culty,
You know?
yes.
Eek. So let's get into why I think the elders are the worst thing ever.
Go ahead.
So, they have this whole benevolent appearance, and they want to keep these appearances. Yet they're the ones keeping secrets, controlling people, killing behind the closed doors. Like, they're always doing the shady, the secret stuff. The whole thing with Leo in season 7 when they try to, wipe his memory and they're still cheating at the same time. This must be your choice. We're not gonna let you say goodbye to anybody. We're gonna make you do this, and then we're gonna cheat and sway you to our side anyway.
Mm-hmm. That made an enormous point about the elders, because up until that point, like I know in the beginning it was kind of through Leo. It was like Piper would hear that Leo, it's like kind of like, oh, my boss is calling me, I have to go. Like someone who just has a crazy work schedule.
Yeah.
There's always this elusive, like my job, my boss, like that sort of thing always pulling him away. But then whenever you actually see and they reveal like more about what the elders actually are, I feel like all they do is make the point that they're just like toxic and just very controlling and very like nefarious. Like they want control.
They're this fake goodness. They're essentially Kali in the mirror going like, oh, Aviva, and they're two-faced, and so their true self is always hidden under this mask of lovely goodness.
And they have motives. They have ulterior motives that they're not necessarily always upfront about, and that's what makes them cunning. That's a cunning aspect to them that does not ring like good to me.
So it's so bothersome. All right, well, let's move on a little bit.
So we got the elders at the top, at least in the sector of
elders
good.
at the top. Yes. Then I have, that's not what I have. This is just elder history that I have notes of that I don't need right now. And it makes me wonder like why they created the Whitelighters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, they say go out and be our.
Well, they're meant to, like, I guess the point...
Disciple, I guess.
Yeah, that's, again, it's the church structure. It's like you have the heads, and then it kind of has this... It's almost like a hierarchy in and of itself, like with the elders, and then the Whitelighters, and then the, like...
The witches.
And they have, like, the Whitelighters to be in training.
Yeah.
Like, it's like...
Sure.
Yeah.
So... All right, so I guess we have after them Whitelighters then, right? That would make sense.
Yes.
And they're the ones that protect the good witches and future Whitelighters to, add to their cult,
Yeah.
add to their followers.
Yeah, and I think there's two elements there. It's first to kind of let me put it this way. I always felt like there was a bit of a predatory thing. It's kind of like in The Wizard of Oz when like Glinda shows up when Dorothy lands in Oz and she's like, I need you to go on this journey and like do my dirty work for me. It's kind of like the elders have a motive to combat evil and whatever their enemy that they say is. Then you have the charmed ones. When they come to power, Leo shows up. Like they get right in there and then they kind of have Leo constantly guide, like, and I guess if you agree with their moral compass, then you would see it as guiding. But if you
Sure.
disagree, then you would think it was manipulation. It was them getting into it and
Right.
kind of not maybe not brainwashing, but just influencing the charmed ones
Hmm.
and how they chose to use their powers, you know?
Yeah. And it's not saying that every decision the elders or the Whitelighters make are bad, because they have done a lot of good in the world. They have saved people and they've done good things.
Right.
But it's it's scary to think, like, what would happen if you do question them? Do they automatically see you as a threat, as see you as
Well,
evil
that's
because you
yes,
oppose them?
and that's ultimately what we would see whenever like Leo would go against them. When people went against their way of being, they automatically ostracized them as a force of evil. It's either you're with us or you're against us, and this divisive
Hmm.
mentality, which is the
Yeah.
creator of evil to begin with. When you choose that, if you have lack of tolerance, and whoever is not like you is a form of evil because they threaten your way of
Your
being,
othering.
right? You're
Yeah,
othering.
it's
Yes,
horrible.
exactly. So it's like if you think about it, like who's actually creating the evil? I mean, obviously, demons killing people and innocents is a force that's obviously evil, but the ones who serve to like, I don't know, it's like it's strange in the pursuit of their way of being. I feel like their intolerance makes them like questionable. So
Hmm.
it's but ultimately, I think if you look at the ultimate picture, like demons are killing people, they're obviously bad. And the elders are promoting some sort of system of protection for the innocence of the world. So ultimately, even though they sometimes have to go by nefarious means or alternative routes to get there that are questionable, and they have to kind of put their morals aside for a moment for the greater good, as we see Chris do, as we see Leo does, they do it as well. And I think that probably the intention with the show is to show the fact that sometimes in the pursuit of good, you have to sometimes
Yeah.
deviate.
Make
Yeah.
those. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, and white letters. I feel like white letters are generally inherently good. Like, I feel like they're much more a force of good than the elders themselves. So,
Yeah, it's kind
because
of like when you're at work and your manager is like not your enemy, it's the guy above them that's telling them to do everything.
yeah.
It's kind of like that. It's like he's just the messenger, you know. He's just the guide.
Hmm.
He's just someone there to try and help you through it.
Right, and to think, that white letters come from people who were really wonderfully lovely do-gooders in their
Yeah.
lifetimes. So I would feel like they have just that pure selflessness and that pure compassion that gives them that thing. Although, while we're on the subject of elders and white letters, I feel like sometimes elders make white letters as a political play,
Okay. Okay.
i.e., Kyle Brody. I
Yes.
do not think he deserved to be a white letter at all, because he showed none of the characteristics that we would usually see from a future white letter.
Yes. I mean, I guess what that puts into question is what necessarily constitutes an action to grant you the chance when you die to become like we know with Leo, he pretty much sacrificed himself for the people that like in the war and all of that. When it comes to Kyle, like what was the initial like what was the thing that he did that was so courageous? I know he was like
Well, he like he worked with Zanku to destroy the avatars,
That's
and the
what it
moment that
was.
one,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay,
and the
political
moment,
play. I see it. I see it.
exactly, and then the moment one like died, when the moment Beta died, he's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done this. Here's how you can stop him." Like, you cannot have a change of heart now. It's too late. It doesn't make any sense for your character.
Yeah.
But sure.
Yeah, it's like he abandoned all that he had pursued for so long, and it's like if you're someone who has
The
this
entire, yeah,
almost evil villainous vendetta to like of revenge to get them back and to kill the murderers of your parents, and then you just all of a sudden it's like, what is this, some story of like the sky's opening up and you become all of a sudden enlightened, and now you know, like, that's the thing. It was like a moment of repentance, and I was like, I didn't really buy it.
right. So, and yeah, for me, I don't know if, see, for me, I believe that future Whitelighters should not be aware of their future Whitelighter status. Like, I know this gets changed a little bit in season 8 with Mikkel and Paige tells her, like, yeah, you're a future Whitelighter. Uh, but in the past, it's usually something that they get guided by a Whitelighter, to help make sure they're on the right path and do the things they're supposed to become a future Whitelighter. Um, but I feel like that's something that you don't find out until actually you die and you get that offer.
Right, and I think that's definitely something that they developed along the way. Like when it was Leo, and Leo was the white lighter, and it was pretty much like, it was almost like, you know how like with the Valkyries and how with like Valhalla, how they would take soldiers and who were valiant fighters, and and they would take their souls. It's like that's kind of how Leo was. It was like you were a valiant good soul. Now you get to almost live forever as an angel and be a white lighter, not an angel but a white lighter. And I feel like it started to change almost as like Paige was a recruiter for other white lighters in like this corporation type thing. Like they're like, we need people to go scout for new white lighters. Like that's your job, Paige. Like
and it makes me wonder too, because I believe too, like if you, because you definitely have to die to become a white lighter, but I feel like if you die before you do all of the things that you're supposed to reach that like level of white lighterdom, that you might miss your chance. Like I think of, for instance, like in Saving Private Leo, the teacher that Leo was helping, she was a future white lighter, but then she was killed by the Lang brothers.
Yeah.
She just moved on. I don't believe she became a white lighter at all, because while she was definitely a do-gooder in the world, I don't know if she did the thing that made her qualify.
Right. She just didn't get chosen, I guess.
And that's part of why Leo was so broken up about it, because they lost someone that was supposed to join their forces.
I think but see, I think that if you go by the rules that they kind of establish in the show, they could have made her a white lighter.
They could have.
So I think the only reason, if you think from a writer standpoint, like they must not have done it, because then why would Leo be so distraught at the loss of this woman? Because if she gets this kind of reward as a white lighter, and now she's around, walking around, living life, helping people, she's able to continue on, and life becomes kind of irrelevant at that point. It didn't matter that she got killed, because she can continue on. So I feel like just for the impact of the tragedy of like the evil that guy did killing her, and how they tried to get back at Leo for it, it's like I feel like that's the only reason it didn't happen. Whereas I guess in a regular scenario she should have been.
Yeah. So these interesting layers, and I feel like that's something that we don't really get explored in the show. I don't think we get explored in the comics coming up either, but it's something that's always been on my mind.
Yeah, like what, like specifically why they choose this person as opposed to that.
Right. And because I feel like they have to do a certain set of things in their life for them to get that offer at the end.
Yeah.
That qualifies them as that future white.
Yeah, it's not like every good person and every good do-gooder becomes a white lighter when they die.
Yeah, right.
That is very interesting. But also I think like to our earlier point, it does reflect a bit of impartiality, or a lack of impartiality, where they are choosing people for specific reasons based on specific things that they choose. Not that other
Mm-hmm.
people aren't worthy, but they seek out certain types. So they chose Leo. They chose this person. They chose to fit whatever their agenda was or whatever they needed, you know, from that person. So
Yeah.
I feel like that kind of reinforces a weird little agenda.
Yeah, exactly. So interesting. All right. So after Whitelighters, I would probably put the Charmed Ones in there.
Mm-hmm.
Most powerful witches. I mean, pretty straightforward. And I love how you talked about how they have that connection, that middle ground, the humanity in them. Uh,
And I think especially in a hierarchy, I think that even though, like I said at the beginning, that I think that that makes them the greatest force of good because they have that they are like the they are the middle ground between everything. They're like the sun in the center of the universe. And
right.
I think that but that does also think I think it makes sense that they're in the middle because in this hierarchy, part of their power and their ability to remain moderate, like they're not extreme, they're not susceptible, I think in general, to the extreme behaviors that the elders have, to the demons and all the things that they do, because they are this kind of moderate middle ground in between, and they can fight for good and carry forth the morals that the elders are trying to do, but in a more nuanced way that I think ultimately is better. But it's because they're not at the top of the hierarchy that they are, I think, able to have that position.
Yeah. And their flaws give them a degree of strength. It's really interesting that way because yeah, they're definitely flawed characters in a lot of ways. They do things that we might not like, or we makes us not like them as much
Yeah.
in some instances. But it just goes to show that that's more realistic.
Yeah. I think that's the thing is that when you get to like this ultimate good that's like immensely pure, like if you make everything too perfectly one way, then it's almost like too much cake is not a good thing. You know, it's like too much of a good
Exactly.
thing can be a bad thing. And so I think that's maybe the basis of their storytelling when they show like the elders are extreme, they're almost like all radicals, and the charmed ones are the moderate people that take things in measure.
hmm You need balance.
Yes.
Balance is very important to the universe, which we'll talk about more in depth when we get to the neutral. But they are that kind of balance.
Yes, and I think that's exactly the point because I think on a universal scale, you have the radicals that help balance the universe as a whole. You have the elders, which are extreme good, and the demons and the evil world, which is extreme evil, and that creates balance within the entire universe. But in terms of the greatest form of good, those that have the balance within themselves as a person become, I think, the best overall because they have that balance that's necessary to take things in moderation.
Yeah. Ah, beautiful. All right. So after the charmed ones, I put the other angelic beings. You don't think about this, but charmed is full of angelic beings.
Yes,
Um, can you think of any?
like melody, right? Would be one.
Yes, a
Yeah,
muse. Yeah,
muse.
muses are angelic.
Um no, not us. I don't know, help me out. I'm trying to think of.
Sure. So I have muses at the top of the
That was the
angelic
first
being
one I thought.
category. Yeah, they're the ones that inspire passion and creativity, and they're kind of every person has their own, guiding muse. And then we have the guardian angels,
Yes.
which they call the guardians,
Yes.
and like someone to watch over me.
Yeah.
And they're just supposed to kind of give you that, like, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Instinct, like the they're like
Instinct.
the
Your
voice
instinct.
that helps like when it says don't take that step off the curb of the sidewalk
Yeah,
and then a car comes by and you didn't get.
your inner
Yeah, your
voice.
inner voice,
Yeah,
that your conscience or your inner
yeah,
protector.
pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah. So that's them, which is crazy because you don't want to be confused by the Guardians, which are, I guess they would be kind of like a evil counterpart to them in
Yeah.
a way.
You mean to the ones that get in your head and say evil things?
Well, like think of the ones like Honeymoon's Over, where they like go into they possess like the criminals, and there's the whole judge. He always puts a guardian in a new
Oh yeah.
criminal, and they start
Yeah.
killing people.
Yeah. So
But
that's
they're called the Guardians too, which is like
that is I never actually thought about that. That's a bit confusing.
it's a bit confusing.
But also
and then
makes
they
sense
also refer to
at the same time because there are very like counterparts of each other with the
Yeah.
same name.
right.
So I guess it does
Yeah.
make sense.
Yeah, it's I'm like, oh, thinking about that.
Yeah.
And then you think of Whitelighters too, who are often called guardian angels for good witches, even though they aren't technically the real guardian angel.
Well, yeah, and that's also one thing I know. I'm like in the beginning, I think that like I do always have to bring this into my head because whenever you think of the way the premise of the show began, it was that like we want this to seem very like good and they're forces of good, they're good witches, it's all very in good morals. And I think the creation of the Whitelighter was like we have to make a point that there are angels and this is like beings of light and goodness. And so I feel like in the beginning, I feel like Leo was supposed to be an angel, like, and the whole orbing with like the swirls of white light, it was like supposed to be this angelic guidance that you would get.
Yeah.
But I think as it went on and they delved into it more, they kind of it shifted, it changed, where you started to see like real angels other than a Whitelighter.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. All right. So we got muses, we got the guardian angels, cupids, obviously,
Yes.
are an angelic being. They bring love, and they bring people together and having chances of love and all that stuff. Although I think Coop was a cupid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like I feel like he was a bit of a like he didn't seem like a cupid because of the way that like he was sent there for like one purpose, right? Just to give Phoebe her like it was like this present that the elders decided to gift her. Like, here's the love of your life. There you go.
maybe like he is useless as a cupid. Here, you can have him.
He's not doing very well. We're gonna let him go anyway, so we might as well just shovel him off onto Phoebe because she needs a little bit of
Yeah.
That's funny.
But do you know why I say this? It's because when he was trying to get Phoebe love, trying to find her love, he was like did this whole Cyrano thing with the guy, like feeding him lines and essentially lying to Phoebe.
Right.
Like that's not how you do things.
Yeah. I feel like wasn't there there was another like story, I think it was a movie or something. I've seen it many like where they tell that story before where like the guy who truly loves the girl ends up helping a different guy get the girl he loves, and she falls in love with the other guy because she falls in love with what she hears from this other guy. You know what I mean? So I feel like they just like they wanted to get that was more of a focus on the romantic story, whereas like it doesn't really. I don't know.
Yeah. And I don't want to spoil too much about the comics, but we learn about how cupids are made as well. Have you read the comics before?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting when we get there. We talk about it has a connection to like a typical cupid, like the baby and the angel, but it's kind of a dark story about how cupids are made. Essentially, they die in as a child.
Oh.
And so there are children who have died, and instead of becoming Whitelighters, they become this cupid thing.
So dead babies become cupids, and then they grow. And that's why is Cupid an adult then? Is it because he just grew up and he ages?
Yeah, something like that. So they kind of grow up. I don't remember how they explain it in the comics, but they do have this whole
backstory
thing. So when we get there, it'll be interesting to explore.
Oh my God, I'm excited.
It's quite sad. So, all right.
It's funny as I'm like trying to come up with like other ones. I'm thinking of just the Book of Shadows pages. I'm thinking of the pages. I'm like, okay, what is the beings of good? Because like when Piper is flipping when a page indexes the book and she's like beings of red. Red.
I color coded it.
Yeah. I'm like, so yeah. Do you have any other ones you're thinking of? Beings of light.
Here's an angelic being that probably people don't can think of as an angelic being, but Sandmen.
Yeah, they're forces of good. They're part of the grand design.
Yeah. because they sprinkle you with the dream dust, which allow you to dream, which allows you to work out your own inner conflicts, your own personal troubles. Um, because if you didn't have the opportunity to do that in your sleep, you'd go around the world being angry and upset and unruly to everybody.
So let me ask you though, do you think that like if you think of like I think of the angel of like destiny, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a functional utility of the universe. We need an angel of
Right.
destiny for the function of the balance of something greater than just the battle between good and evil. And the Sandman feels like he's a bit of a utility to the universe as a function.
Sure.
Like I mean, like what were they? Um, with the satyr, the
The nymphs.
nymphs. So they're like they help nature. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
instead of being a more like neutral function, they're more like maybe like nymphs. How nymphs help with nature. The Sandman is like a man that feeds and
Maybe
nurtures
maybe it's about
dreams.
maybe it's about dreams and maybe human nature.
Okay, got it.
So you have like the nature of Earth and then the human nature
Yeah.
is what Sandman do.
Hmm. Isn't that interesting? That's actually that's what it could be. The Sandman is like the nymphs to the human psyche.
Yeah, so cool. So yeah, and it's interesting about Sandman. I don't think we think about this. They can only sleep when all of their charges are awake,
Which is literally never.
which is yeah, it's like super rare. Like I don't know how.
And also, it's funny. Like, what do they do? Do they just like go unconscious and just fall asleep, or do they like rest? Like, where do they sleep? Like, what? Like that?
Yeah,
Like, when you think into that, it's like there's so many questions involved.
yeah. I mean, I know they have like their own like kind of like realm. They have like a different plane of existence. So maybe they just go to their plane. But
Like
that's
sleep on
also
a
where like
cloud.
but that's also where the demon in San Francisco Dreamer attacked him, was on his own
Oh,
plane.
right. So he's
So
got a little place. Yeah.
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 All right. After Sandman, I have pretty much the entire magical community. So that nymphs would be in there.
Okay.
We have dwarfs, elves, fairies, gnomes, gremlins, and see, gremlins on the side of good. I guess they're just kind of there. They're just doing their own thing. But leprechauns, mermaids, ogres, oracles, satyrs. So they're just those, and trolls. I think are on the side of bad too. But whatever, they just have the magical community at large.
But we would
But like
consider them like they're part of a magical community because they're just inhabitants that are innately
inhabitants,
magical. They don't actually
yeah,
have not like they don't have a purpose, but they're not like they don't have this objective like a Sandman would. Or well, I guess I
exactly.
mean nymphs foster nature, but it's not like I don't know. They
Yeah,
like what's the purpose? Like, well, no, because each of them I'm wrong because each of them do. So like a leprechaun will spread luck throughout the world,
luck.
and
Hmm. Let's
fairies.
see what.
I don't know what fairies do, but but they're just innately magical creatures. I get it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and a lot of these different, like nymphs, leprechauns, trolls, and those are all part of a fae lore.
Hmm.
Like they're all a sect of fae characters or fae people. So
Okay.
yeah. So people would think of fairies as just like the typical pixie thing, but pixie is actually a type of fae. But there's goblins are another fae. They're all part of that umbrella,
I
which is
never
interesting.
heard of I've never heard of a fae. I've never heard that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So fae is like a race, and generally, they have a human characteristic to them.
Okay.
So, and they're generally like magical. So they're magical and have human qualities, but they have this whole other, like changelings and things like that. That's all a fae lore, I think.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah. So that's all I have for my good hierarchy. Everybody else I have is under the neutral. So,
Wow.
anything else you want to talk about before we move on?
Um Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of status, like one thing, the last thing I think we could talk about is the like towards the end of the show, like the series, when the charmed ones do have that, they kind of develop, like, not that they don't have a reputation throughout the whole show, but towards the end they do kind of become these like almost like there's an element of fame, like whenever the magical community will come to their house with like Sword in the Stone, and everyone was treating them like these, like, like champions of their community or whatever. And I feel like in some ways, like, they were seen as, at least the magical community, more, like, I don't know, I feel like they were a little bit more, like, maybe they were like the tier of a celebrity almost. Because I guess the
Yeah.
kings and queens level would be like the elders, I guess, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but they were like celebrities in the community of the magical. And I always found that interesting, how as the show went on, like, even in the real world, like, they, because of the Homeland Security issue, and because Phoebe was a columnist and she had a level of fame, they had this like society type of fame that they developed, like, in San Francisco. And then also at the same
Mm-hmm.
time they became like famous in the little magical community. So I find that element interesting, that even though I guess in the hierarchy they were kind of ensconced in the middle, um
Yeah.
they were still in that upper part, like they were prominent figures, I guess.
I'm glad you mentioned Excalibur because I did want to bring that up in this as well. Do you consider Excalibur to be a artifact of good or a beacon for good?
Hmm.
Or do you think it's more about who controls it? Because I mean, see, in my mind, I always thought of it as like some, a source of great power for those who are worthy. You have to pull it out of the
Right, it
storage.
chooses
You have
you
to,
because it understands your innate nature and whether you're worthy.
you're brave and true and power and all that stuff. Because I believe like the whole legend is he had to have this leadership quality, this pure drive to lead and do good things for the community that lets him pull that out. So
Yeah. Well, then I think it would be, because I think the two things is the sword itself assesses the person who's pulling it out, in a sense of, are you a fit leader, not just if you're
hmm
a good person, because like, I think Paige tries to pull it out and she's a good person, so like it didn't
yeah,
work for her. It doesn't work for just a good person. It's, are you fit to lead? And I think anything that bestows great power on someone and judges them worthy or not based off of their innate good nature, I feel like it would be. Like, I think there's a lot of goodness
yeah,
rooted in the core of that
right,
object, and how it wouldn't empower someone of evil unless they, like, cloaked themselves in goodness or did something to trick it, like they do the Book of Shadows.
yeah, exactly. And I feel like once it's pulled, you know, different people still can use it or attempt to use it. Um, they just won't have the opportunity. It will just keep fighting them, or find ways to try to like get back into safety in the stone or whatever. But
Yeah.
we see because we've seen Mordaunt try to use it, and it still fought him. And the whole reason why Piper could do it because of Wyatt, is all
Right. It
about
chose
Wyatt
her
being
because
worthy
it knew where it was putting itself in the
headed.
hands of someone who could bring it to where it wanted to go.
hmm
And the thing is, I see a lot of parallels with the the sword and also the Book of Shadows. There's this kind of, this ability to judge, it holds great power and great possibility, and it chooses, it's protective over who it grants that access to. So I think that's an innate thing to an object of good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just an object of power, but I think in the way that it's shown, I think it is
hmm
for objects
Yeah.
of
And
good.
there's a I don't know if it's like it's almost like there's a sentience, but not quite. Just like a magical feeling or magical, because the book is tied to that same way. So I think it's good that. we have to. I don't know. I'm just rambling.
No,
now.
no, no, but I think that's a good point. I think that the because the thing is, you also have to remember, like, isn't it if someone pulls the sword from the stone, they become pretty much the king of the whole magical community.
And it gives them a lot of power. It makes them sort of an invincible force, or at least a more powerful force.
Well, it's kind of like I think that's the thing is that just like the Book of Shadows, if you think the power and the knowledge inside of the book is what allows the charmed ones. It's what grants the access of power and status, and all of that magic comes from what's within the Book of Shadows. So I think it's the same thing with the sword, is that if you have access, you are allowed, it chooses you to be able to access its power, then, you know, that's how you ascend to that place of status and like leadership, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think Evil Wyatt in the future, the one that we've seen, would have had access to Excalibur? We do see Leo like has his hallucinations, his barbarous hallucinations of Evil Wyatt with Excalibur, but that was a vision or a hallucination. It was his own
It was
mind.
it was fear based. It was worst case scenario fear. I think that actually does pose the question of whether it's an object of good or just an object of power. What do you have an opinion? Do you think?
I mean, see, I would believe I see, in my mind, I think the sword is innately good. I think it wants to propagate a noble cause. So in my mind, I don't think the actual Evil Wyatt from the future had access to Excalibur at all.
Wasn't there a time when the Book of no, because he's a Halliwell, so I think he had access to the book. Even if he was evil, because I guess it's an extension of him. So if he's evil, then the book is evil.
Book would change.
Okay.
Right. Unless he did some kind of magical thing to Excalibur that changed its affiliation.
But I think you're right. I think I would err on the side of I don't think that it would grant him. I think it would sense the evil within him and reject him, in the sense that it's not a family. It's not like the Book of Shadows, in the sense that it's not connected to him internally with his family heritage. The book is an object of heritage. So being a member of the family, he's an innate owner of it. So when it comes to the Excalibur, it's not a family heirloom. It's not an object of heritage. So it's not going to have that loyalty. It's going to judge him as it would anyone else. And I think ultimately, if he was fundamentally evil or under the influence of it, I think it would reject him.
Yeah, I believe that too. So cool. Agreed. All right. I think that's all I got for good.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it. I think that was A to Z.
Yeah, cool. I'm happy with that. Where can people follow you and find you again?
So my Instagram is Ethan Hinkle Art, and I have a Patreon where I'm currently making a replica of the Book of Shadows, and that is called Hinkles. I also have an Etsy called Hinkles Shop, and you can find me all there.
Groovy. You can follow this podcast at Words of the Witches everywhere, except for Twitter, where we're Words of Witches. And stay tuned for part 3, where we talk about the neutral parties. Your destiny still